don't think I would have gone, like, I would have.
I'd like to call the meeting of the August 8th meeting to order. And Tracy, can we start with a roll call? I would love to. Thank you.
Terry Petty,
Here.
Twine Web on the Cloud,
Here.
Karen Walter, here, Mayor Gentino,
Here.
Dan Lovell,
Here.
Tessa Crawford,
Here.
Katie McIntyre
Here.
is here. Katie, we didn't hear you, just so you know.
Is it coming through now?
Yeah, you look unmuted, but we don't hear you. Do it.
Okay, let me log back.
Oh, maybe it's my sound. Maybe it's me.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. It was me.
Here.
Thank you, ma'am. You're very loud. Okay.
And Bill Andre is excused and Stephanie not here yet.
So first of all, welcome everyone, and I would just generally like to thank those of you who are aware my mother passed away on July 16th. And the Weber girls and my mother was relatively famous, so I'm recovering from planning an event. I was like, lady, you just can't have a funeral. That would be it. So I just want to thank those of you that were aware for being supportive. I want to let you know that I'm easing my way into this new normal. So I might need some additional brains to help me stay track, but I continue to be very committed to doing this work and doing it well. And I'll let you know if I'm out of my mind. And tag will be it. So you did receive a cover sort of message from me with the email, so you know what the focus of the meeting will be today. So I'm just going to guide us through the agenda. And then when we get to the board education part, I asked Tracy to set the context for that conversation. Rob, keep us on track. We can. Something doesn't always know. So the first thing is that I'd like to sort of, if you've had a chance to review the minutes, if you have any adjustments or revisions, please let us know. If not, I ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
So. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Very much. Tracy and Tessa, I'm gonna have you talk about the bills and the treasurer's.
I'll start with the bills. There are just a few for. I guess I put them after the treasurer's report, forgive me. One is for MRB services, for $4,035. That was from June 30th to July 27th. That's under the 4,500 a month, so we're getting there, making progress. The other is we did get the payment from Prison City for the amount that had been underbilled previously. So that needs to get dispersed out to the county, school, and city. I am going to see Bob tomorrow to sign checks as long as that's approved today, and I'll get them out the door in time. And that's it for this month.
Questions, concerns? Tessa, would you like to shift into the finance report? The treasurer's report.
Do you want to like scroll to the top to use the? I'm gonna try to keep it a nice summary. You can start at the top and we'll just go right through it. So we met was it just last week? I think 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. So I was able to have the access for the QuickBooks and for the bank statement, so we were able to transition into me reconciling. So just a little bit added layer of oversight. Well, first, did anyone have any questions on the reports? Any concerns with them? Because then I'll just go right through. So last time we had picked up where Tracy had explained the different accounts that we had. So the checking account or the savings account was established. The checking account for just the pilots were established where we had the $500 cushion just to get the account started. And then we have the $75,000 CD. We discussed the accounts receivables that are still being cleaned up just a little bit. The JBJ was just the late fees, right? And then just some reconciling that still needs to happen. And then the accounts payable that's listed there was partly the MRB right? I don't think there's anything else other than what was happening the next thing. So, and then also the due to government as part of that reconciliation piece that's still getting worked on, so that could change. One thing that we did just discuss was, on the balance sheet, looking at the net assets. You just want to make sure that that's at a healthy balance in hopes of being a lot more productive, which I think already happened this year. That will just continue to go up rather than decrease, but there's no concern right now. And then, sorry, if you want to just keep scrolling down. Does anyone have any questions?
You want to ask?
I'm sorry, that might work better. Yes, and then we also discussed that I could go more through the report, so now that we have it set up this way, we will just continue with that. So this just shows the activity, any expenses and income that's come in. Tracy breaks it down with just July, and then here's our year to date. The contract services, that includes the MRB. The travel and meetings, I think that was just with, where the Katie and, oh my gosh, Karen went, right?
Yes.
But really nothing too out of, or anything's nothing out of the norm this last month that needs to be reported. And then this is just where we're standing right now, to show a bigger view to compare to last year, which is kind of hard to compare because it's almost apples and oranges. No, I think that was it. So there was not a lot of activity last month, but everything's moving forward. We had a conversation about the sale of the property and those types of things, which I think we'll talk more about later. But how's that?
I want to thank you, Tess, because the actions that you're taking are also putting us in alignment with what we said to the auditors that we would make corrections about. The other thing I want to remind us all about is that Elaine was basically saying to us, it didn't matter to her. We didn't know what was going on, that she really expects us to understand the finances of the IDA and to be able to be as articulate about it as we need to be. So I want to thank you, Tess, for starting to, you and Tracy for sorting through things so that we can be in that way when they ask them. And so just, I wanted shortly, I'm saying that just be observant that everything we're talking about is in direct alignment with what we said we would do to make the corrections from last year's. Good job, Tess. And Karen. It's gonna be the women of my family. Okay. Next on the agenda.
I'm sorry, I had a motion for the bills.
Yes. So I'd like a motion to pay the bills as presented. Well, thank you, Dan. Second,
I'll second.
any discussion? Good. All those in favor? Opposed? We're heading into new business, and I asked Karen if she would put together just a brief overview of some of the highlights from the IDA Academy. One of the things that I'm hoping that is, as we deploy ourselves to different educational opportunities or meetings, that will report back on information that resonated with our colleagues about it, things that we might want to be paying attention to. So do your thing, Karen.
Okay, but I wanted to know some things that maybe are provides and one of the things that they mentioned were that the BBC wetland regulation changes that are in the pipeline are going to expand setbacks for wetlands and requires the developer to plot the wetlands and expanding definitions of certain endangered species. And where that comes into play for us is 14 Allen Street, have wetlands. And so that would be something. The other thing that was mentioned, that there's a bill pending to require IDAs to consider whether a company's project will provide child care. So there seems to be, kind of a work-life balance slant to things. I think one presenter was really interesting. He says, think long-term. Your developers and consultants want to only think short-term. He says, when I say long-term, I'm saying 30 years ahead. What is this project going to look could it look like? Let's see. Be on top of your subcommittees, finance, governance, if something doesn't feel right, somebody raise their hand and say, let's go with our gut, pause for a moment. Instead of just, sometimes the momentum just keeps going and it might not be a good project. Another item was, talk to your energy companies. How much energy can they provide? What is the power capacity? Because, in Ithaca specifically, they said they were shocked that they didn't realize that they didn't have the power that they needed for certain projects that they wanted to go ahead with. And track your payments from pilots, bill and pay them in accordance with the pilot agreement. One thing that was interesting too is, are you creating jobs? Can you verify job creation? And of course, what am I supposed to do? They told me they were gonna do 40 new jobs. I was supposed to send somebody out, help people when they're leaving the building, and so forth. And so they just said, you have to be a little creative. You might have to say, we're so happy you're up and running, have to take it through the facility or what have you.
Can I just add to that Kim, real quick? So the really interesting thing here, this was state auditors. This is the comptroller's office, auditors from the comptroller's office. Basically, we've always been told collect NY-45s. Those are their state reporting of their jobs. And now they're saying we want to see more than that. We want to see you make an effort to verify those jobs in another way. But they have no suggestions as to how to do that. Or what they would accept for that, to Karen's point. One thing that we've talked about in the past is just like parking lot counts, stopping by, like, okay, if this is open 3 shifts and they're saying they have 100 people, does the number of cars in the parking lot make sense? Auburn is highly driving for the most part, there's some public transport, so like something like that, I think they would smile about, I don't know, but they do want to see a stronger effort to verify jobs, which is bizarre to me, because they're saying that their own documents are the same, are sufficient to verify jobs.
Is that as the result of people saying that they're going to create a certain number of jobs and that did not manifest?
This wouldn't change that. I'm not sure where this is coming from. I don't know what problem they're responding to by telling us this, but we would know that with the NY-45s, unless they're lying on their NY-45s, in which case they're also already on the state.
If I could offer something maybe for our consideration, one of the things that I think might be interesting for us to do would be to engage informally or formally with the people that we are providing projects for.
Yeah.
And let them know when we're meeting with them, that's one of the discussions we want to have and ask them to bring the evidence. I think that given all that's going on, we maybe just shouldn't assume anything. And I also believe that relationships really matter. So if we can step up the way that we stay in relationship with the people that we're signing off on projects for, that might be a great intro step, and let them know that that's what we're going to want to talk about. And what would we see, like find a question, and we just do that through a level of engagement with the people that we've provided projects.
Yeah, and I will say that our monitoring policy that we put in place many years ago includes an annual monitoring visit. I would say we're probably not doing that right now. I have not done it this year. I don't think CETA did it before they stopped. I don't know what happened last year, but that's something to lean back on and revisit as things progress in terms of reestablishing those annual visits, and that in itself, I think, is a
Yeah, I mean, it's on the books that we kind of doing, and I know that Bill Andre was one of the architects of making sure that that was one of the things that we tried to do. So we have it in our, procedures, but like Tracy was saying, it's not, we don't know this might that happen.
Well, I think it's two-pronged. It'll accommodate this request from us, but I also just think it's good to stay engaged in a relationship with people that were creating these opportunities.
Absolutely.
What do you think about that, Rob?
Well, I think the documents currently allow for all of the above. We certainly collect the NY 45s as part of the documents, and there's a right of inspection. Right, visit. Aside from doing those two things, I sit in here and haven't thought about it much, and I know that Comptroller has been up and armed about this, and object of this, and verifying that everything is true. But aside from those two things, I'm not quite sure what else you can do. Within the law, and it's not like you can mount cameras.
I spent.
Well, let me be clear what we're not gonna do, sit in parking lots and cough. We're not doing that.
So.
Take that off your plate, Tracy.
I understand afterwards. With respect to them, they want this verified. The needs to do it are sort of. Of the board. So, so if you do those two things. I think that's all you can do, I'll think about it more, seeing it's never really a sleep. Think about it, but I think those are pretty much all the things you can do, is try and verify. Through inspection and collecting NY 45s.
It just makes me think how people from IDAs with 80 projects in their portfolio feel when these things are happening. Yeah. When these conversations are happening.
I think another thing you want to monitor is, change circumstances. That might be something that. They're probably thinking about, Comptroller is thinking about change circumstances, and they came and promised 40 jobs, spoke of the project. Changes after it's built, they thought they were going to create 40 jobs, now they're going to create 20. What do you do with that? That's something that would turn out to be in NY 45s, also during inspections.
Yeah. I think you're related to what you said is something that's never been up. So.
The other two things that I wanted to share was, one, there's a current change, and it says HCR low income tax credits. Only for new construction and not rehab of existing houses done. And it took place the effect of 1/1/24. Apparently, in the past, you could be rehabbing. And you could get this credit, but now they just want to pivot to new construction. And the other, rate of interest that I had was every $1 of IDA abatements generates 6.57 cents in new tax revenue. So it might be like down the stretch a little bit, yes, a new industry comes in, that, they start off. Filing come to full taxation or full participation or what have you. But not a bad return.
I'm sorry, what's that number again?
For
Say it
every
loud.
dollar of IDA abatements,
Yes.
it generates 6.57 in new tax revenues. That's what I've got.
Any other questions or comments? Tracy, were you there as well?
I was there as well.
Well, what did you pick up, Tracy?
No, it was a really good conference, and we had. I learned a lot, actually, in the last session that I was moderating, I learned a lot about power availability and like the entities involved in studying this, and beyond just the like NICEAG and National Grid. So that was interesting, and I brought that back to our staff. And then there was some discussion about UTEPs that I thought was really interesting, and some recommendations about UTEPs. And I think it's probably worth us looking at our UTEP in the coming months, especially once we kind of come together around housing, and really think about that. So I'll bring those comments back, because I had them on a paper somewhere other than right here, and I don't remember exactly what they are. That's okay. But yes, I thought there was some really good content and suggestions coming out of there, but also auditors, they want a lot. It was a little scary to hear them talk.
Board education will continue. Yes.
What was the date of the change of first?
For the housing, one of 20.
It's a policy change. I've mentioned that before, but it also presents an opportunity for data for other IPAs to step in on the rehab projects, which they will not.
It is a bummer though, because that was the way a lot of historic rehab were happening.
Well, that's the thing, like this whole pro-housing initiative, they just continue to make it more difficult to achieve the goals of the state by taking these things away. Especially a city like ours where there is no housing stock. You know, we hate the demo, we like to do the rehabs on the positive.
Well, I'm glad that we are continuing to have that conversation because as I'm learning more about it, a lot of stuff feels counterintuitive to me, to that initiative. So when we get to the board education piece, we can start to talk a little bit more. Karen, thank you so much. And one of the things that I did ask Karen to do was to bring forward trends that we want to start just paying attention to, and or any information that came out of that would also generate more board education discussion for us. Thank you so much. Because we know Karen took copious notes.
Follow somebody else's sheet, they didn't give me any.
So thank you for giving me the highlights there, Karen. You are like the other part of my brain. Tracy, updated this unfinished business or updates?
Yeah, so I just want to touch base on a couple of items that have been kind of on the radar. I did hear from Steve Byer that the properties, I think I mentioned this in the email, those properties are listed on the MLS now. He was gonna reach out to the neighbor that had expressed interest previously, so he's out there working on getting the word out about those properties. I haven't heard of any bites yet, but it's been about 5 days, so, you know. And then, but that's it on that, so we'll just keep an eye out on that, and if there's anything that you think we should be doing beyond what Steve is doing to get the word out, by all means. If there's any entities you think we should be sharing that information with, let me know, and send out some info or some flyers or something. And then on so we had that joint economic development meeting a couple of weeks ago. Since then, Steve, Jenny, Michael and I have met a few times to discuss next steps. CCPC is going to be meeting September 12th, I believe it is, to review some proposals for executive search firm. So that process, the hope is to get underway in September, to hire someone, engage someone to start that process in September. But these things are going to take time. We've also talked about how economic development will continue to progress as we're in this process and there isn't an executive director. That conversation has not resulted in much new other than what we talked about. You know, Jenny is doing a lot from the city's perspective. I'm supporting her to the extent that I can. Michael is kind of taking the rest of the county and doing what he can. And then all the small business stuff, the county did enter a contract with SBDC to handle all the small business stuff. So that is being diverted directly to Michelle, which is helpful because that's a bulk of the deal flow that we see or that we saw, and it's also sometimes the most consuming. So it's good that someone specialized is taking care of that for everybody. So we're just having continuing conversations about timelines and what happens when an executive director comes into place. But one thing that both Michael and I are mentioning to both you and CCIDA is that our budgets are due in October. Chances are 2025, there will be at least a portion of the year that there isn't an executive director, or at least if there is one, you're not going to be ready to bring the IDAs on. So we should start talking about your staffing for 2025, and whether that continues with MRB Group. Our current contract, as I think it's a 7-day out, we would continue that. So once you were ready to move, if and when you were ready to move over, you could do that relatively quickly. Or if there's another solution you want to proceed with. So I'm just gonna put that on the table because we'll have some we'll start to look at budgeting at the next finance committee meeting and bring kind of a draft to the September meeting for approval in October. So that's just something I wanted to put out on the table for any thoughts that you have now, or in the meantime, if you want to reach out to Tessa or myself between now and our next meeting is September 4th, I believe. If you have thoughts that we should be thinking about in the budget, by all means, I just want to get that conversation started.
Tracy, does the CCDC or the county plan to communicate what you just described as the in the meantime strategy? How will people know? That's what's.
I think there's still a conversation that needs to be had with the CCDC board of the in the meantime strategy. I
Right.
think there's still work to be done there on how to bolster that over time. So I would hope that there's a plan to communicate, and it might be through me, because I am also on the CCDC board. So I'll report back after we have our meeting on things.
And I'm specifically saying more of a public facing communication. How will we let the business community know that this is what we're doing?
Right now, if someone lands on the CETA website, it's a landing page with contact information for Jenny, Michael, and SBDC. And those three are referring to each other as needed. That is primarily the communication.
So I have to be actively looking for
Yes,
something in order to know that this.
there's not a proactive, I wouldn't say, well, I would say Michael Miller's being proactive with the CCID waiver for sure. I wouldn't say there's a general proactive economic development approach right now, because the ability to manage that approach that it yield results is limited. So I should know more after the September board meeting, and the group of us is gonna meet again before then. So we do have a bi-weekly meeting on September. We meet every other week, and we'll continue to have those conversations about how to continue to work.
Right, and so specifically for me, from my perspective, just saying stuff, you know, what to do, it's not just literally saying stuff. For me, if there's an opportunity for the county chair or Steve to literally say, in a way that the media would pick up, that this is what we're doing for this moment, I'm offering consideration that that might be a good thing to do, right? Because I think there's like this void of knowledge, and it's not like we're not doing anything, we are doing something, and I think it's important to communicate that publicly, this is my point of view. Rather than let some people wonder like what's going on, does that make sense? And this isn't a bad thing to communicate, I mean, I think there's a message to communicate. So I agree that the process of, you know, if somebody goes to the website, they're gonna get deployed. And since the county's sort of taking the lead on this reimagining of what this is gonna look like, I think the more they communicate publicly about where they are in the process, the better.
Well,
Now, you know, I just say stuff, I'm open to respectful feedback, criticism about that perspective.
I think this, some administrations or some, entities are better at communicating than others. And I hope that it didn't fall on deaf ears. My recommendation of Councilor Carty's recommendation that we are aided to participate financially. Then we need to see the tape.
Yes.
And we shouldn't have to deny on you to whether surreptitiously give us the information or what have you. I mean, and we've already lost almost another 1 month.
Yeah.
So on August 1st.
I will say that this has come up at each one of the meetings that we've had with the four of us. So it is still part of the conversation, and Jenny in particular is pushing it very strongly, and Steve is hearing it, and I think it's just a conversation that the CCDC board needs to have, because they have since August 1st.
Well, those are two things from my colleagues agree that I would like to be raised as things that we would like to see evidence that we're being heard and understanding what.
Do you think it would be helpful for Ada to draft letters on the CCDC board of what our expectations are or requests are?
Yeah.
Because I will say, and I know this is public meeting, it is falling on deaf ears. Okay. And it wasn't our idea. When the county came to us with this idea of CCDC taking over CETA, it was pitched to us that they would expand the board to include people from the state. Now all of a sudden they don't want to do that. And I'm saying from my position on Ada, it's a non-starter for me. No vote.
Yeah.
We are county taxpayers. We're not paying any more money. City's not paying any more money. We are county taxpayers. They're not asking the town of Troop. They're not asking the town of Wasco. They're not asking the town of Senate to pay more money. We're county taxpayers and that's what we contribute. Now, if the conversation needs to be, is Ada going to contribute money? I'm fully open to having that because $20,000 a year is ridiculous. But there has to be mutual respect for Ada. I think there's an air of Ada is not needed with folks at the county, and I disagree strongly with that. It's been recommended that Ada should be disbanded and there should only be one IDA, and I strongly disagree with that. So from where I'm sitting, I know I'm one of 9. That's where I'm at. If we can't have Ada representation, I'm personally not interested in moving forward, and if we need to communicate that to the CCDC board, then I think we should do that. And I know it gets funky, right, because the county chair is there, the county manager is there, but the CCDC board is a separate entity than the county. And it would really be up to the CCDC board if they want to expand membership.
Yeah.
So maybe that needs to be communicated directly to the CCDC board to take the outside interference out.
No, I think that would be great to have, we're just put in writing what the desires, needs and outcomes are, or the stipulations of Ada's participation. So there's no question that this is not a suggestion.
I would agree.
And I mean, just before Terry, one quick thing, like, I'm gonna be in a weird spot here because I'm on that board and staffing you. And when I'm on that board, I need to be thinking about CCDC.
Sure.
But I mean, I will represent what I think is best for economic development in King County, so for what that's worth, but in that seat, I just want to make it clear that I'm not necessarily going to be representing Ada's point of view. So it would be good to have Ada representing their own point of view.
I think that that's important, and then obviously the minutes are being taken. Heard from Karen and Jimmy about their concerns. And I think that's a very good recommendation. It's like a communication on the Ada letterhead saying that these items are very important to us. And the update, but also like what was expressed by the Ada board members as far as representation on the board. What concerns me is that obviously, there's interest in getting an executive director for the CCDC. But I believe the board can expand while that search is happening. I think that like, it's not like, oh, it's not like that can't happen. So, I know we're looking forward. I just want to say one of the things that I felt being on Ada under the umbrella of CETA, I felt like I was in the dark quite a bit, not knowing what was going on in the high echelon. I do not want that to be the situation with whatever the new thing is. That's my point of view. And I think that, our request for more information and a representation on the board is a very fair request.
Any other thoughts? Seeing some amen for the, what do you think, Daniel? Tess,
I agree.
Katie, can you hear this discussion?
Yes, I agree too.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, that we're in agreement that we want at this point to send a letter from Ada to, would it be to the CCDC, Tracy? Outlining, what we're looking for in order to feel comfortable about participating in the process of defining this new entity. I'm hearing that we want clarity about the interim process. That we're looking for not only communication internally from them to us, but also as appropriate public communication. And the other thing is that we are at this point requesting that a city representative or an Ada representative be put on the CCDC board. Am I hearing it correctly prior to the activation of the search process? That we want to be at the table? Say that again.
I think it's gotta be an Ada representative.
Ada representative.
There was the second one you said.
The first thing is we want clarity about the interim process. I think the second thing just comes under the umbrella of communication. We want to, from the CCDC to us as the board of directors, to be communicating with us about the status of this process. And additionally, correct me if I'm miscued on this, that we also want to be aware when there will be public communication about the process. And then I will flip the order of these, and then the other thing that almost sounds like a deal breaker for us in some ways. Is that we want to have an Ada representative appointed to the CCDC board. Prior to the launch of the search process. Let's pull out that, let's see what I.
Prior to the launch or prior, like, so before we even engage a firm?
That would be my preference. Like, to me, it seems. I don't see an argument against putting somebody from here on that board. Maybe you have one, like.
I'm just wondering about the timeline of it, like if we. It's just a time issue.
I would say ideally that would be great, because having our input, even in looking at who the firm's gonna be, would be helpful. I think if that doesn't seem feasible for some business reason, that we definitely want to be at the table at the point that applications will start being, when the process officially kicks off. So I don't wanna put you in the position, I'll draft that letter. And then we can send it out to all of you when I get, and let Rob also look at it from his perspective. When I get the green light, we'll send it to the CCDC. When's your board meeting?
The 12th.
Okay, I'll make sure you get it.
Thank you.
Are you saying one representative or two?
Do we have a point of view? Are we saying Ada representation or two Ada representatives?
I mean, they have a board of 5,
It can go to 10.
so we want to make sure it's an odd number, so. Like.
I would be fine with if we worded it 2 city representatives, one of them has to be an Ada board member.
Okay.
Right, because right now, there is a city representative, Tracy lives in the city. You know, the thing is, we're a third of the county.
Now you're third.
Yeah, they're the one. That's very true, third county's population.
I think that's fair. I mean, what are they gonna say? They're gonna say, yes, let's negotiate. If they say no, then we look at a third viable option. So I think that this is the right thing to do. So Tracy, I'll draft something. You can just drop it in letterhead and then we make sure that they get it. Does a board packet go out to the CCDC board?
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing, Tracy, and we can maybe talk a bit about this offline, but if there's at some point this feels like some conflict for you, please let us know, because we do need to sustain a relationship with a firm.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure that we don't jam down your back.
I mean, I'm gonna, at some point, I'm gonna have to make some decisions.
Yeah, I agree.
But, yeah, for right now, I think in terms of, I am staffing you
Right.
and moving forward, what you are directing.
Right.
And with them, I'm having a conversation about what's best for economic development. in
Right.
Keith County.
Right.
And I think I can manage that for now, but I'll definitely keep you in
Thank you.
the loop if things start to get a little too messy.
This needs to, for me, this needs to be as clean as possible for all of us, because there is something bigger than all of us that we need to accomplish. And we can't have our heads in the same dynamics that will impact the decision-making process. So I think if we start with these recommendations, request to the CCDC board, let's put that out there, let's see what happens, and let's be open to not only wanting to be a good partner in this process, but we also have an obligation to do what feels best to us, have our gut on behalf of Ada. So this is a good place for us with that. Yeah, and then Tracy just stay in, and also vice versa, if we have those ones about, finding any conflicts, it's not about trusting, it's about how do we conduct this business as clean as we can, okay? Anything else? Go
Well, I
ahead.
was just thinking, I mean, this is a partnership, is what, this was launched as, and, maybe I heard it wrong, but when the idea of what was floated about adding membership, it was, oh, well, we shouldn't do that while we're, working towards this path. And it was like, it hit me as though, we're all professionals, we've all sat on many communities, we know about etiquette, we know things, it wasn't like this was going to be something earth shattering to add 2 more members.
Well,
And that reluctance, for myself, it was somewhat telling, and if their bylaws say that they can have up to 10. They must have thought ahead of things that we may have a need to expand on, and so here we are.
well, I think let's make this move, and if we get some resistance at that point, it would be my style to say, make this make sense, because it does not make sense. Right, so let's be hopeful, that seems to be a popular word. Let's be hopeful that we not only get heard, that we get a response that will enable us to get the signal that we need to feel like we can fully engage. Fair, and I'll draft something up, Tracy, and get it to you no later than maybe Tuesday, close the business. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Gotta do it. So we're going to shift a little bit to our board education discussion, and Katie, I hope you can hear me okay. One of the reasons that I was supportive of us continuing the housing conversation was, hey, I wasn't here when you had the last time, so who am I not to get some work? But the other, I have another reason, is that I feel like the topic of housing and us choosing to be part of the pro-housing community initiative or movement really provides an opportunity for us as an IDA to deepen our understanding about what that means, but also to establish clarity about ways we can and cannot engage in supporting housing projects. And then the other thing that ultimately I'm hoping to have happening out of these board education meetings is that we identify topics or issues, I'm gonna use this language inside here, that we are gonna have like a point of view about, so that when we start to become involved in these larger negotiations about economic development, we're not at these meetings blowing around in a windsock as a board. We're saying, well, this is what we think about this is what we need to do, and I think housing is like right in front of us right now. And I'm asking Tracy to start tracking other topics, and Rob, you may have some that we need to be paying attention to as well. But at any time, any of us are representing our IDA in any of these larger meetings, I want us to be speaking in one voice about what our point of view is about emerging economic development scenarios. And there's be some things that we just like legit can't do. But there's this whole other piece where we are one of our priorities is to be advocates for making sure that Auburn is a good environment and place for business. So I think even if we technically can't do something, the expression of we believe that this is a good thing to do, even though it's outside of a purview for the larger economic. I just want us to be clear about what it is we're talking about. And then Katie, at some point, I think the marketing brain committee can sort of orchestrate that for us, so we have a set of, I'm gonna call them talking experts, right? But I don't want any of us to ever be out there confused about what Ada's position would be, or our point of view is about any of these emerging things. I speak in statements, so push back with that. I'm not saying this is what we're gonna do, but that's sort of the method to my madness with the board education. So housing is on the table. So Trace, where would you like to take this one?
If you don't mind, I have a PowerPoint.
Well, please do. PowerPoint Trace.
I'm not gonna lie, I did use and I I adjusted a presentation I used at a previous IDA Academy to talk about housing and IDAs. And let me just. Let me figure out, I think I can share. Share, we'll just share this screen. Share. This. Okay, so. Again, this is kind of a reuse of a presentation that Michael and I had done. I pared it down to just some of the key points that I thought were important for Ada to go over, just so we all have the vocabulary that the larger community is using, but also understand the different components and where IDAs fit and don't fit. So kind of the question, why are IDAs even getting involved in housing? We'll talk a little bit about the housing continuum, because that's how a lot of these conversations break down. I'm going to show you an example of a finance gap specifically for a single family home, but the same thing is true for rental development, just at a much larger scale. And then just some best practices for establishing a but-for. As you know, IDAs have to establish a but-for the incentives, the project wouldn't happen. We need to feel confident the incentives are necessary. So we'll talk just really briefly about that as well. So in terms of why IDAs, housing development is just getting more and more expensive and more unpredictable. With interest rates are starting to come down, which is wonderful. There was a point in time that developers were saying that costs are going up something like 10% every 2 days or something like that. It was crazy. I think that has started to stabilize a little bit, but it's not going down. If anything, costs are stabilizing. They're not going back to what they were. So they're still very expensive, even if costs are not increasing, which I do believe they still are. Developers are needing new mechanisms for planning, developing, and financing their projects. So there are changes to things like tax credits happening. There are changes in the pro-housing certification process and funding related to that. And there's expanding understanding about different opportunities available. It's particularly, housing development is particularly difficult in areas with lower median incomes. So lower income areas, and we'll talk, it seems obvious, but I'll just show you the numbers on this. It's the lower the income in the area, the harder it is to do housing development and affordable housing development. So we'll talk more about that. So this is everybody familiar with this, the housing continuum mix? So this is kind of how right now we talk about housing and the different types of housing that exist in a community. There's kind of broad consensus among experts that having the full spectrum in a community is generally healthy to the extent that the community supports each type of housing. And, you know, obviously a rural community will have less of each of these types, but so scale is different from community to community, but generally speaking, all communities will need all of this type of housing for one reason or another. And it goes all the way from, you know, people who are sleeping on the streets or couch surfing and are literally unhoused into emergency shelters, transitional housing, social housing. This transitional and social is where you find the supportive housing, and then into the rental market and home ownership market. So you've got affordable for both of those, and market for both of those. Are there any questions about just the continuum and what we're talking about here, or what any of these are? So we'll kind of start in this emergency shelters, transitional and social housing. This is where a lot of the tax credits and tax abatements but a lot of the existing programs already target this market. There's a lot of operating funds in this space available. Developers in this space can also use a 581A tax abatement. It's kind of like a 485B or something like that. It's an as of right exemption, but it's much longer. And it's a little more complicated in terms of how it's calculated. And what we've been hearing from these developers is that it's highly reliant on assessors making calculations about regarding like the revenue of the organization, and it's, the way it's calculated is somewhat inconsistent from assessor to assessor. Whether it should be or not, it is. It can be unpredictable over time. And it's difficult to do projects that combine this type of housing with other types of uses. So some of these developers are now starting to come to IDAs, so that because they're actually willing to pay more for the predictability of pilot. So they will come to an IDA and pay more than they would under 581A, but with the caveat that they have an expectation for how much they're gonna pay on a year-to-year basis. Because what is really difficult is when an assessor calculates something a certain way, and all of a sudden, like, they're way out of their budget on their property taxes. So it's not, we, as of now, don't have anything in the pipeline here. A lot of the times the city has actually been doing these pilots, like the city works with the Auburn Housing Authority. So a lot of this is being done by the city directly, but just be aware that this conversation is happening with IDAs right now, and that it's not impossible we could see it, but. Go ahead, Greg.
Before going any
Yeah.
further, earlier we were talking about like employees, right?
Mhm.
What? How does that fit into
Well,
any of
this
the
is- This
conversation?
is the first piece,
Okay.
okay? We're gonna get there.
All right,
Okay. So just know that this conversation is happening. I'm not saying we're gonna do work, and anything I say up until we have discussion, I'm not advocating one way or another.
No, I'm just,
I'm just saying that these are the conversations that are happening, and I just want you to have the information. to have that
okay, yeah.
conversation.
But there is a theory behind the connection between employees and the various
Yes.
kinds of housing
Yes,
that is on the continuum.
yes.
Okay, good.
And that connection here is that there's a whole untapped labor pool here. And especially in the types of jobs that we're having a hard time filling. Entry level jobs, service jobs, you know, if someone is in transitional housing, they're gonna wanna be looking for work. And moving into the next step, the social housing, and then moving into the regular housing market. So there's a potentially untapped labor market here that needs all sorts of services in addition to housing. The housing often is that first barrier to employment, because if you don't have an address, sometimes you can't get a job.
Tracy, I'm not sure I understand what social housing is.
This is where you find more of the like supportive housing, so it's not necessarily like short term, so transitional tends to be a little shorter term, like put you in an apartment 6 months to a year. Social housing might be a little bit more long term, but has a lot more, but still has those wraparound services.
Like case management.
Yeah,
Where would like senior assisted living fit in?
that can be here potentially, or it could be in the in kind of a whole different category of like medical.
Really?
Yeah. But there is like some of this social housing would affordable senior living, people who are only living on their SSI and have low income, so it could be within the social housing. But some of
Community house comes to mind that provide
Yes.
that kind of housing.
Mosaic.
Yep. Okay. So I'll get out of that. I think on the affordable side, I think this is where there's a lot of interest in communities, and I think there is a lot of interest around this got off somehow. Anyways, affordable, so we're talking about affordable rental housing. I don't know why that is like that. My box got off. Oh, we're just talking about rental.
Rentals, yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so we're just talking about rentals here. A lot of IDAs are working in this space now. It is a space that IDAs can operate as long as you can justify it as a commercial project, is what Rob would tell you.
That is what I would tell you.
And, you know, there's 2 spaces here, the affordable rental housing. Generally, that is defined as under 80%. This is where you'll find HUD money coming into play, home money, and those types, and like that, you know, under 80%. But communities in particular, like a lot of communities are actually struggling in this 80 to 110% AMI. So this is people who are not necessarily considered under that low income threshold, but are just above it and are still struggling to kind of find a space in the rental market. Some best practices that we're seeing from IDAs, some of them are targeting this affordable rental market. Others are saying the affordable market has enough incentives, let's only target market rate. So you could go either way. But other IDAs, some of the practices that are going into their UTEPs are affordability targets and set aside. So saying 10% of your units need to be affordable. Or, you know, X number of units need to be affordable at such and such an income level. Obviously, local labor is coming into play in these UTEPs, incorporation of supportive housing. So especially at that affordable, making sure that there are units available for people who need support and that that support is available within the project. And special consideration for bigger projects, particularly in blighted areas, and adaptive reuse, especially now that you can't get LIHTC for adaptive reuse. This might be something that you see that IDAs, not you, but IDAs see more and more of, since LIHTC is no longer an option for these projects. So the rental market is where you're going to find people who, whether it's market or affordable, this is where you're gonna find people who can't get financing for whatever reason, whether it's a credit issue, it's an income issue, it's an affordability, they can't afford to have a down payment, they don't have the money for a down payment. So the people who either can't get financing or can't afford the upfront cost of buying a house. This is also people who maybe aren't settled yet, they're not looking to buy a house right now. This is people who are perhaps downsizing, and seniors that are downsizing from their homes into apartments and putting their homes on the market, which is great, we love that, because it's such a tight market right now, we want to see homes on the market. And generally, they're very well cared for, so this is the market where you find all sorts of people who either just aren't ready to be in a home, don't want to be in a home, or perhaps are done being in a home. Questions about the rental? And then we get into ownership. This is a space that IDAs are not yet participating in because we're not allowed to. Some IDAs have dabbled, but a lot of them have stepped back. I think they've gotten some strong words about those practices. But it's still an important part of the community, because people do want things, and we want people to own things. So there's two places here. There's the affordable home ownership. So this is usually what you'll see with like Habitat for Humanity, home headquarters. This is where the homes are specifically, they've received some sort of grant funding to subsidize rehab or construction of the home, and they sell it for an affordable price to a family under 80% AMI, again, that 80% mark. And oftentimes these programs will actually have financing built into them because sometimes these families can't. So it creates an opportunity. And then market is, you know, and oftentimes 80% actually is higher than you think it is. So a lot of people actually fall into this category you wouldn't expect. I think, oh, I have it later, but Auburn's, I think 80% of AMI is like $70-something thousand. So we're not talking about, you know, people working at McDonald's necessarily. We're talking potentially about teachers and people working in the city and people, you know, everywhere. In addition to service workers who are working at Wegmans and restaurants and such and such. And the market home ownership is kind of everything, theoretically, everything above 80% AMI. And again, we're still seeing that gap. There's a middle, we call it the missing middle. So right now there's the affordable home ownership that's very targeted to that under 80% AMI. And then the market home costs have gotten very high over the last few years, as you've probably all seen. So there's a middle portion of the market that actually isn't eligible for these affordable homes, but they can't afford the market right now. So there's this missing middle, and the way to address that is how do we get more houses on the market? How do we build more homes? Because that will bring the cost of housing overall down. But that missing middle in both the rental, and that group is also in the rental market right now because they can't afford to buy a home. So that missing middle is where a lot of really cool work is happening right now. A lot of really cool conversation is happening right now. There haven't been really great policy changes around this yet, but that's really an important group to look at because that's a lot of our workforce, actually. Like a lot of our just like day-to-day people we run into who are working are in that middle space. That are in between this 80% and what's actually affordable or what's actually on the market. So, one thing I will point out about affordable homeownership is one of the challenges these programs have run into is maintaining affordability over time. And this is a space that, you know, there's a lot of conversation about like if IDAs were to get in this space, could there be a way to create some predictability in the taxes for these affordable homes? Because that's one of the spaces where things can get a little wonky for affordable homeownership and maintaining affordability over time is if taxes are increasing, which tax rates in Auburn have been very well managed, and that's not necessarily the case here, but some communities are struggling with this, with people are getting into these homes and their taxes are just going up and up and up and over the course of a few years, they're finding they can't afford it anymore. So, yeah. So that's the home ownership side. Again, right now, we can't actually do anything in terms of tax abatements here. However, to Gwen's point, there's space for advocacy, and potentially if we start thinking about something like a community benefit agreement or like CCIBA recently established a buyout for their solar projects on our local labor policy because they were all deviating from it. So they said, okay, if you want to deviate, pay us some money and we'll put it into programming. We could do something like that with housing or projects in general. I'm sure Bill would have something to say about that. And find a way to make that money work for the affordable housing or for some sort of homeownership program. So those are just ideas, but there's ways that we could play in this space, but not necessarily directly. Okay, and then, so this is the financing gap. So when we're talking about financing gap, we're thinking about the things that come in that play into an affordable sale price for a home are the household income, because that's dictates how much they can spend on a month-to-month basis, the size of the down payment they can afford to make, the interest rates, insurance costs, and property taxes, because those are all the things that go into a mortgage payment. So just backing into it, 80% of AMI in Cuyahoga County is $71,500. So again, affordability is pretty, like, being in that affordable space is actually pretty high. The cost burden threshold, well, this is, you know, the general consensus is that households shouldn't spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs between housing and utilities. So the affordable monthly housing expenditure we have here, and an average that we got from the BLS for monthly utilities is $375. That means a monthly mortgage of $1,400. And then just tapping all this stuff, 30-year fixed mortgage, 6.5 interest, 10% down, not even 20. And using the city's combined property tax rate, just typing that into a mortgage calculator, we came up with an affordable home price of $138,000. And even that feels high to me, having like made less money than this in the past. That seems high to me, but still, just from a math perspective, this is how much a developer can sell a home for as affordable. This is how a developer backs in to their construction costs and whether or not they can actually build affordable housing. They've got their acquisition costs, their soft costs, their construction, their financing, and developer fee. Some affordable housing developers will reduce or eliminate their developer fee for certain projects, but it's not something they can do sustainably because that's how they support themselves as an organization and continue to do work. And then on the other side, we have the revenue that they can bring in from grants and the affordable home price that we came with, the $138,200. You can see here, there's a gap here. It's about half of their developer fee, so they would take half of their developer fee. Ultimately, these developers, ideally, they build in a developer fee and then they're happy to make zero. After they get their developer fee, like if they make more money than that, great, but as long as they can get to zero. That project works. In this case, the project doesn't work unless they're willing to forego half of their developer fee. And sometimes they'll do this to get into a market or to, and again, this is just math, these are estimates, this is not necessarily a real project. But this is a problem. And this exists in the rental market as well. Just think about like, to build a home is $300,000 plus. To build 20 units is a multi-million-dollar project. So everything is just scaled much higher for rental. And depending on what type of rental you're doing. And. Okay, 10 after 6. So establishing but for, just really like 2 best practices are knowing your market. The city potentially doing a housing market study will help with this. But in the meantime, we can do a rough analysis based on what Steve is seeing and based on what data I can pull, and a test of reasonableness. I like the test, so what the test of reasonableness is the developer provides a pro forma. Someone who knows what they're doing looks at it and says, are their assumptions reasonable? And if so, what is the level of incentive that is right to make sure that the project can happen, but the developer is getting a reasonable return on it. They're not being unduly enriched by the incentive. And so like the city of Newburgh, we do this with the city of Newburgh IDA all the time. And there have been multiple times that they've actually pulled back their schedule to right size it to a project. This is one of those things where like if there's a set schedule in your UTEP, I would say use it when someone's asking for more to justify that they need more. But it is a good way when in doubt to justify the incentive that you're potentially providing. And especially in a space where we're still kind of new to the game, although Ada's been doing housing projects for years. So these are ways to kind of cover CYA for the IDA in terms of the level of incentives. And I just explained that. So now I'm done. Okay. Whew. Was that helpful?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It's like, oh, I got it soon. People are getting tired. So from that, questions, starting thoughts. I think the intention here is to understand where Ada fits, what if anything Ada wants to be doing in the housing space, and what mechanisms we want to use to do that. Is that fair? Fair assessment? So any comments on that kind of first question? Like, do we want to find a way to kind of finagle our way into the home market within legal bounds, the home ownership market? Are we interested in rental at all? If so, market or affordable? Like, what are your kind of initial thoughts?
I would like to see us, just based on the conversations we've had at the city level, I'd like to see us be involved in the conversation. But I do agree it's gotta be a mix, right? Like, I don't want this to just turn into all rentals. I mean, and you made a great points in the last meeting. Renting can be predatory, but there's a demand for rental property as well. And I'd like to see us take a balanced approach and when we're considering the projects, make sure that they're just not in one space all the time.
Other thoughts?
Why would we have to, like, do you have to limit it to different particular things? Like if Ada's to get in the market, like you're just saying, like you would do like, well, I guess I don't understand like how.
So the only projects Ada can do are projects that can be justified as commercial. Right now, that tends to be like rental is generally where that falls, in terms of incentives. So single family home ownership, Ada cannot provide incentives for. But we can be part of that conversation, do advocacy, potentially find funding mechanisms, attach to other projects. We could get creative, but we can't actually provide incentives there. Anything else, anything we can deem commercial is free game.
So if we create an incentive package for a particular housing program, then we would just put that out there. We would advertise that. And that's how,
Yeah,
Exactly.
I think it would be good to kind of come to an agreement and eventually incorporate it in UTEP. And make sure that our mission is well aligned there. I think it is, because our mission is broad enough to capture that, but I think it would be wise to have. something.
Yeah. Got it. Makes sense.
Especially if we want to do something different for housing. and other types of things.
Is there any evidence that shows when there's new housing? If market rate rental housing, those types of products are built that frees up single family homes. So say the people that are getting ready to retire, their kids are in college, moved away, moved out, whatever. And they want to downsize. They don't want to. Maybe they want to live here 6 months out of the year, live down south 6 months out of the year. Is there any evidence that supports that when that type of housing is made available, it frees up additional single family homes that go back on the market?
I don't know that there's a direct tie in that way, and if somebody else knows of something, by all means, I think. There's definitely data to show that the supply of single family homes is short. And. But I don't know that there's necessarily a specific data point that I have off the top of my head at least to say there's a direct relationship between building rental houses and single family. So I have to look for that. There might be. I just don't know what it is.
I think from what I've read, there was truth to show, I like it. It's that's part of the reason why. Between the rentals and the. Sort of.
That's the argument about for creating more. This is we talked about project before. Sense would be I would remove the friction in the house. That would want to downsize this area was your rental, this is probably what I would pay on mortgage. So, yeah, and you're right, so that's a good question, but I just left my parents, and they're actually at a point where they're considering selling their house and renting, they just don't want. My stepfather just doesn't want to do maintenance. And
Jenny's parents just moved into Connect 55 and one of her sons is five nerds.
so that's what I was wondering, like, I know my
So this
personal
does.
stories, I was wondering if there's any market data that supports that.
I thought we were talking about what there was going to be some sort of survey or. Report that was,
Market survey.
While we're trying to get a tracking.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You don't mind?
Excuse me.
All right, but jump in. Locally, when we talk about housing or home ownership, right, it's always, I think all of our minds tend to always go to that single family home or a two family home, duplex or something like that. But if you look at what happens in other areas, right, that you have ownership of like condo units, right? So you got a mortgage on a portion of a bigger structure, right? We just put up a picture of it right now. Most of us, because of the context of the conversation, would be, oh, that's an apartment.
Yeah.
So with that type of housing, I don't know what kind of desire there would be for that kind of housing here as opposed to like oceanfront or something like that, but. Is that a way to get into some housing where people could actually get into some home ownership and build equity and things like that?
Yeah, I've heard about this also specifically in the senior market. It's like they still own, but it doesn't have the same like. Maintenance that comes along with
Like Bluefield.
a single family home with land and whatnot, and. Rob can slap me for this or stop me as soon as I say something that's crazy. Have heard of IDAs. Working on condo projects. And taking them out of the pilot once they're sold.
So your
Or
construction
or
costs.
renting them and then if they are sold, taking them out. Does that sound,
Yeah, I've heard of that being done too. And I don't know why that would be any different than someone doing, say,
single family?
single family home development and doing the same thing.
I think one way that one place got around it is they rented them first. So they were technically rentals when they were built, and then when they were sold, they pulled them out. So it feels a little scammy and probably.
Well, then why couldn't you do that with anything?
Right. Right, which is why it's probably not, but yes,
But
that's.
if you weren't necessarily evading the property tax, but some of the other things that.
They're kind of common areas.
Just curious.
Yeah, it's a little wishy-washy from the IDA. point.
Everybody always looks for a loophole in our rules.
Yeah, no. So generally speaking, from a community standpoint, like that's definitely something that should be looked at in a housing study, because it is a very viable way to keep seniors living locally, so. And downsize, in addition to having like senior or other types of senior living, but, and even for young professionals, you know, as a starter before they, you know, get married and have a family if they desire to. So I think that's something the market study should look at and could be a very viable opportunity. But, it would be, but specifically to the IDA, it would be a trickier one to specify.
Yeah, I think the difficulty in all these cases, in these cases, that you're taking something in and then you have to sell it off and pull it out.
Yeah, it's also very, it'd probably be a lot of work.
Well,
It's just not messy.
it would be difficult, as far as, taxable status stating, things like that. You'd have a sort of a rolling. Abatement, all the taxable status dates, different parts would be separate.
Rob hates this idea.
No, I don't hate the idea, in fact, when you were talking, I was thinking about.
Let's get through next year's audit.
In fact, I was thinking about it, when you were talking, I was thinking about how to do it. And, yeah.
I think it's a very good concept to look at. The IDA's involvement, we need to work a little bit more on. I guess is the answer to your question.
I think the sweet spot is the affordable and market rent. That's the low hanging fruit. The sort of the transitional stuff, I know most the entities that get into that are usually not for profits, you know, which IDAs have a problem with not for profit products. So not to say that for-profit developer would come along with those, but usually in that sort of housing, it's gonna be not for profits.
Which is probably why the city's been doing it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Which is
Tracy,
the city's sweet spot.
What were the two other things you were kind of seeking information about? Did you have two other kind of questions?
Just kind of like, where does the IDA want to be involved?
for me, I need to kind of process this, but I also like to. As well as processing this, think about the pro-housing initiative. And, you know, where that. Does that align, doesn't it align, you know, those types of things.
Yeah, so I would say that the IDA, that's kind of like with ESD grants. The IDA benefits layer with those just fine, and it helps to, the IDA actually helps to reduce the operating costs for the first however many years, for usually 10 for us. So it actually plays a different role for developers. So the grants is reducing that upfront cost and financing cost, and then the IDA piece, the sales tax and mortgage reporting tax comes in at the beginning to help reduce the cost, but really the pilot helps to manage their costs
Predictably.
somewhat predictably and increase their tax liability steadily over time rather than taking a big hit, well, not a hit. And rather than paying a much larger tax bill the year after they just invested millions of dollars into a construction. project. So the IDA benefit, if there's a pilot involved, is really often more about the operational savings and helping the sustainability of the project long term, as opposed to the grant. So they work together pretty nicely because they kind of do different things. And I imagine the same would be true of programs.
One of the things, and I know that these are ever evolving ideas, so I'm not looking at still, this is our right, but I do think that as things start to unfold, if we can identify, like, what is our philosophy about this, right? There's clearly some things that are just percolating for me, that there is a specific role we could play in incentivizing projects that could be commercial in nature. The other thing is that Tracy mentioned that we could advocate for things that are in the housing continuum, because we believe that in combination with what we do, what could be of good interest to the community. And so that's the kind of thing, like I'm always thinking, like if 60 Minutes pulled up on us and said, like, what's your point of view or what you're thinking about this? I just want us over time to evolve to a place where we do have a philosophy about this. And it doesn't mean that we have to be the entity doing it, but as I love that question, Karen, right? Like, how is what we can do align with other kinds of things that are going on so that our IDA is always at the table in an agreed upon way when those conversations are happening. In the same way that we just established a point of view about the CCPC, right? And so the more information we have, I think the other thing for me, Mayor and City Manager, that I usually not I'm practicing using your. And I do think it's important for us to understand the city's perspective about this, right? Because there is certainly connectivity between what the IDA can do, what the city needs to do, and also as everybody's, that the whole eventually wanting to catch Micron's eye, what it would be better if we could show up speaking from one voice. So I think also what informs the philosophy of the IDA needs to be in alignment with the city's goals in this space.
And I've actually got a note kind of along the same lines, the other two groups that should be involved with that, at least the other two groups, zoning, planning, right, zoning board, planning board. And we've talked on several occasions about trying to get folks together, whether it be through a work session or whatever. On occasion, maybe it's a work session or just an educational session where we share some of this information.
Right.
And just go, because I think it's too much to expect that in a quick work session,
Exactly.
you're gonna make really impactful decisions.
Right.
But to get some of these conversations out in front of the public also,
I
because
agree.
the other issue we're gonna have, we've been talking about some development projects. We also have the issue of, we haven't seen any significant development in this community in a long time, right? Where it's been more than a single house here or a single house there. We start having discussions where we're gonna put an apartment building someplace, or we're gonna put 15 new homes in a particular area.
Yeah.
People need to understand the benefits to that, what the benefit is for their neighborhood and all of that. And I think that just generally as a community, we've got a different philosophy on housing.
Yes.
It's a different generation with different interests.
And I think an example of that is a perfect CGI where they're building those 2-unit houses in Dubai, actually basically buying half the house. That's a new form of development. And they're going like crazy.
They're very approachable, something like that is very approachable for that, it's middle,
Yeah.
they're not buying homes.
To respond to, comment, Chad, I think one piece that's missing oftentimes is, the word stakeholder. So a lot of times when there's, a public hearing, either receiving G grants or whatever, a lot of times the neighborhood that is being, impacted and not considered stakeholders. And I think that would go a long way. I know that there's another zoning change. It's more, and depending on what area of the city it is. Again, rather than, you know, kind of one day you get the letter about a public hearing for planning board about a project, it's the next night. Like get people scrambling. You see what I'm saying? So, you know, some good communication, you know, I think it's helpful. I'm gonna go to, so I need to adjourn.
I think we're gonna do that. Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate your input. You know, a couple of things just for our consideration, and that I think as long as we monitor what's happening. I don't think that we need to have an established philosophy now. I think that there's a point for us to evolve to that place. And I would like to float, this is where I want to get with Katie and activate her committee, is that there also could be opportunities where we are the convener of a conversation. Like these are things we're thinking about, and it's highly probable that a point of view or philosophy will evolve, not only from what we think, but what we're hearing, that will inform what, if they come and say, what do you think, what, on behalf of the IEA board, that I would like us to evolve to that perspective. This is but one issue. I think we need to get a better handle on the energy situation as well. So that's why I asked Tracy to take a lead. I also do think, though, that we need to deeply understand what the city wants to do and is trying to do as it relates to topics that interface with the actual work of the IDEA, so that we can be having whatever kind of respectful debates we need to have about divergent thinking as a body. But that we're also making sure that the things that we do are always giving lift to desired outcomes of this.
And I think our desired outcomes are gonna be highly dependent on housing study.
Absolutely, that's what I mean.
Otherwise, we're just kind of like rolling the dice, say that we think this is what we want.
One interesting thing that came out of the Lane study that we did, was that the employers actually said, the rental market in Wayne County is very small. There's not a lot of rentals, especially in like, western side, but what we heard from the employers is we need short-term rentals. We need rentals for 3 to 6 months, because all of our medical providers, when we're talking to medical providers, they're using a lot more traveling nurses, traveling doctors. Some of the manufacturers are doing a lot in terms of like insurance and co-ops, and those kids were staying in Geneva or Rochester. They couldn't stay because they couldn't find something for the period of time they needed. So that's one of the things. I'm not saying that's what's happening here in Auburn, but those are the types of nuances that come out of this kind of a study. And now they're looking very strongly at employer supported housing to say, like, they're connecting rental developers with employers who need the short-term housing and figuring out a model to create those units in partnership between the two. And so like there's creative things that can come out of the housing study and could impact where the IDA is needed or what the city really wants. But it was cool.
Thank you, Tracy. We're right at 6:30, and again, my goal for us is to have a good baseline understanding. And we need to drill down more into topics we can. Tracy, thank you for those slides. If anybody wants to take another look at them, is that something you can share? So please feel free to ask Tracy for that, or Tracy, just feel free to send it to all of us. And then if you can, and the mayor and the city manager can kind of keep the ADA board focused on kind of what's coming in our direction. And maybe one of the things we really want to pay attention to is how the results of the housing study get communicated to not only us, but to, as you said, to the broader understanding. I'm just not convinced that the community has any idea about this particular topic in the way that we would need them to have an understanding about it at the meeting. Something would be going down. So just know that that's something we can do, be conveners of conversations about things. And let's stay open to that. And I've got Tracy just to start identifying what other topics do we need to pay attention about. So energy is on my mind. On the bottom of our agenda is that our next ADA meeting will be September 18th at 5 p.m. Our finance committee meeting is positioned there, and just as an FYI, the Red Sea meeting is happening August 26th, 1 p.m. at SUNY Oswego. And can someone tell me who's representing Cuba County at the Red Sea?
So Jen
Oh, yeah.
Jenny Haynes is now on the scoring committee on an interim basis, so that we have somebody in the room for the project scoring. So thank you to her for agreeing to do that. There are elected representatives as ex officio members on the committee, but I don't think we actually have someone sitting in the official spot right now.
And does the county put somebody in that seat? Whose job is
It
that?
has generally been the director of CETA,
Got it.
so we're expecting that potentially it will be the CCDC.
Okay, great. All right, so anything else to come for us tonight? I will draft a letter from our conversation, make sure that we circulate it to the board for a green light. I'm gonna keep it real simple and direct. And then when I get your feedback, I'll make sure that it's on letterhead. And Tracy, I hope this doesn't put you in a conflicted situation, but just make sure that I deliver it to the chair of the CCDC to be part of whatever board information is gonna.
Yeah, if you, I'll even put it on the letter.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because that's not a skill set I just. My sister's like, girl, I pay some money. But as my younger sister told me, I'm digitally incompetent. I'm like, I forget 20 year. So anything else to come before us? If not, I think this is, we're at a very exciting tipping point in the community, and let's do our part to make sure we tip it in the right direction. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So.
Y'all don't wanna go home? A second, all those in favor?
Hi.
Thanks, Katie. Katie, catch up with me when you get a chance. I'd like to talk to you about the work of your committee.
Definitely. And Terry and Dan, once I have that conversation with Glenn, I'll be in touch to schedule our first committee meeting.
Thank
Sounds good.
you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.